Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sharp Vision with 25, the podcast that discusses the benefits of prioritizing project pricing in your business strategy and why it matters. Today, I'm joined with Chuck Lee, Vice President of Pricing at Gainwell Technologies, and Nate Joseph, Chief Revenue Officer at 25, to dive into why successful business leaders today are prioritizing project pricing and where the future of pricing is heading. So thank you so much for joining us today, Chuck. And Nate, I'll let you take it from here with our questions for Chuck today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. And yeah, Chuck, thanks so much for being here. I guess the first question, just to jump right in, is you've been doing pricing for a while, 20 plus years now. And so how, how have you seen pricing evolve over the years? And I guess how's it different from when you first started out?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Nate. Uh,
Yeah.
it's changed a lot, right? I think in 30 years in the past, it was, the pricing function was really more of I'll say a controls function, right? It was a necessary organization that would be one of the things that would really be more about the controls, a position within the organization rather than a market position within a
Hmm.
sales/market position within the organization. So in the past, we had huge elaborate systems. Most of us worked on mainframe costing and pricing tools,
Hmm.
um, and we're hand keying in information or carrying cards and to feed into systems that essentially would compile costing inputs from the business and generate the output, but that we put into proposals. We would behave more or less like, I'll say, more of a cost plus mentality, and this is, I'm talking more about, like, I'll say, the IT services industry. But it would be necessarily evil for compiling a lot of cost or solution information together, and then I'll say, being the roll up factor that would be the point of view that we would take to the business and the financials of the business. It's evolved a lot today to be more of, we're way more market centric now than we
Hmm.
were in the past. And I'll tell you that the throughput of our systems, I'd say we probably handle almost 20 times more volume with higher
Oh, wow.
complexity than we did in the past. So, obviously we need systems that allow us to speed up and be able to move more quickly with the market.
Yeah. And I guess it, how have you seen technology evolve in pricing? Because you mentioned being able to do 20 times more on throughput and output. I mean, that's incredible, but like how have you seen that evolve just over the years as well?
Since I've been doing it, I've seen us, the I'll say the evolution in my mind has come from, like, we had mainframe systems that we were keying into that had, all of the, I'll say, the rates and all of that stuff was centrally located. So we had, like, systems, centralized tools that everyone had to do the same thing in. So it wasn't very, we weren't very nimble, but we knew we were
Hmm.
very consistent, right?
Yeah.
And then, it evolved to, we evolved to having things like Excel and Lotus Notes be part, Lotus 123 be part of the equation. And then when that happened, people would then use those tools. But at the end of the day, they would use those tools to do a bunch of stuff in the background and then feed it
Hmm.
into the monolithic system that they
Right.
use to do the pricing. And then from there, you found that people started to move away from the pricing systems and and then focus primarily in the spreadsheets, because the spreadsheets gave them more flexibility, they were quicker. But then the downside of that was you lost the consistency of the
Right.
operations because everyone could do their own thing. um, you lost some of the controls, and at the same time you didn't even know whether or not, we all remember times where you've done 100 things in spreadsheets and you go, oh my god, there's the error. And then you're
Hmm.
you're you're
Yeah.
you're wondering, how far the error reached, right?
Right.
And so So we went from that into the spreadsheets, but at least it allowed us flexibility. We can do, we could change a lot of stuff in front of a client. When in the old days, clients said, well, what if we moved it, shifted the project 3 months? What would happen? And we'd say, well, let us come back to you in 2 weeks and
Oh,
tell you,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
And so the procurement cycles were a lot longer that I was dealing with. You would have to spend a lot more time doing a lot of iterations to get to the end, to get to your end goal. And then I'd say now we went from that to spreadsheets. And like I said, the spreadsheets, found that, yeah, great. You had a lot more flexibility, but you lost a lot of control in the process, and you lost access to a lot of data because all
Mhm.
of the metrics and stuff that you may find in your system that's now in spreadsheets is no longer accessible to everyone to analyze or to look
Mhm.
back at. So then we wanted to move out of the spreadsheet world and back into the system world, and that's when you saw some tools coming out that were more I'll say Windows based tools
Mhm.
that had a pricing structure to them. I'd say that there were few and far between that truly could encompass the capability and scope that you had to do when you're pricing large, IT or large services contracts and services solutions. That a lot of people went back and then built their
Mhm.
own in-house tools to try and to do that again, just under a different platform. So more
Mhm.
moving toward cloud-based again, or moving toward unique systems that were being used in companies. But that's sort of the evolution I've seen from a system standpoint. But I will tell you that going from, I'll say that control mentality to going to an insights mentality is sort
Mhm.
of where I say where we've shifted to, right? So
Yeah.
now, like today, it's, I think, less about the pricing tools and more about what the pricing tools will tell me from a
Mhm.
standpoint of data and
Yeah.
analytics, and how I can actually learn quicker than I did before, and I think that's the beauty of how you do more with less now. When I look back, our throughput was nowhere near the throughput. Like, we had organizations that did this that were
Right.
hundreds of people, and now those
Mhm.
organizations are like 20 people doing the same
Right.
or more volume.
Yeah. Which is amazing because if you're able to, you basically were able to reduce the amount of people needed by 80-90%, and you're able to increase throughput by 20 times just with technology. It's really, I mean, I guess it's really fascinating how far we've come as far as technology in this arena. So where, I guess, shifting gears, looking towards the future, I mean, everybody thinks AI is where we're going, but where do you see the future of pricing heading, especially as it relates to like the data and the insights, the analytics that you're seeing, as well as what you may be thinking about with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think even I take the tooling for granted a lot more
Hmm.
today than I did before, right?
Hmm.
I don't lose as much sleep on whether or not the tools work. It's sort of a prerequisite that happens, and we see
Hmm.
that today. But it's also being able to have the tools and then have it be flexible enough so that it works in your business arena
Hmm.
is an important part. But like I said, I'm focused way more on how to learn fast from it. I mean, we extract a lot of data out, like, how do we build the solutions? Have we built them enough times that we can now templatize those solutions? Then once we've templatized them and metricized them, how do we learn quickly? What are the analytics around them? How predictive can we make them? And then, now when we go down this path of AI, there's a lot of that process that we had people go do all of the data curation and
Hmm.
all of that stuff that we now can let the machines do a little bit more, be more suggestive to us.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that'll once again it will probably make things go faster, but at the same time, it'll definitely give us more insight
Hmm.
so that, we can actually be more strategic when it comes to our positioning in the marketplace.
Yeah, there's no doubt that AI is going to be able to continue to improve the data, the analytics, the ability to process large amounts of data and actually recognize different patterns with pricing. I'm curious though, like as it relates to AI and as it relates to building process structure and templates, I personally see AI being able to give even more custom and tailored solutions to clients based off of every different spec. And I wonder, how do you see that potentially impacting pricing? Do you think we're going to go back towards every deal is unique, and there's a lot of nuance that sort of AI is finding, or do you think the idea of templatizing pricing will still be a thing as you look to
Well,
implement AI tools?
I think there's still, I think it's going to be about speed to get to consistency. So I think
Hmm.
everything we do is going to mature. The way the products build out, demand, the requirements of our clients is going to change, and we can move with it. And I think that'll happen. But I do think that AI will make those things easier to happen. Like, even as I look at it, there are a lot of ways, like just comparing what you did before to what you're doing
Hmm.
today, telling you if what you're looking at looks out of bounds to what you've done before. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of things that you would have had to have, like, stop what you're doing, collect all that data, do the
Hmm.
analysis on data, and even know the question you want to ask,
Right.
right? And then go look for it, right? Versus now, you know, AI can be more predictive and say, hey, you're walking this way, that you're a little bit out of your comfort zone. Maybe you ought to be looking this way. Or it could tell
Hmm.
you, for everything we've sold before, it looked like this, and you're building something that looks like that. Or the
Hmm.
client you have typically buys like this. So there's a lot of things that it can help coach you down. I mean, in order to replace the process, it's gotta, there's a lot of stuff that's gotta happen. And I don't think the world will stand still enough for that
Yeah.
to happen. But I think it can at least it can help you dig in
Yeah.
to the data. Cause even today, if you look at, prior years, it was there's just less information there. And
Right.
so we are building things with less information. And now
Hmm.
there's way more variables to play with. We're just sort of extra sensory at this point, right? There's
Hmm.
way more stuff to actually bring into the equation that you never
Totally.
brought into the equation before, because you just A,
Yeah.
didn't have the time, B, you couldn't find
Hmm.
it, and it was just too much to absorb.
Right.
Right? So
Yeah,
now
totally.
so now you have, I think the winners of the future will be the ones that can that can absorb as much of the information that they can to get them to build their confidence in how they package a
Right.
solution for a client,
Yeah.
right? And cut down the cycles, get to the right answer faster, then spend more time trying to figure out how to maximize profitability, or how to,
Right.
all of those other areas.
Hmm. One thing that's interesting that you mentioned was the ability to be able to spot things or see things that you weren't even thinking about before. And pricing is very interesting because it's very much an art and a science, right?
Yeah.
On one side, it's like, what does it cost? But the other side is, well, what are you getting in return? And the ability of your people to be able to articulate why the price is what it is. How do you see, like in the future, people being able to justify or rationalize cost based on like all these different factors that are now coming in? Do you think it's going to change the way that people need to rationalize their numbers, or do you think it's going to actually be easier to stand behind your numbers because you're going off of even more concrete data?
I think it makes the conversation a more compelling conversation, right? So
Hmm.
so if you're selling, you can gain more confidence in the value of the proposition you have,
Hmm.
you can create more evidence, right?
Hmm.
And if you can do that, you know, it actually can lead to a more differentiated solution slash
Hmm.
price, right? And
Yep.
and you know, as a buyer, right? I mean, if you can understand the value of what you're buying, then the
Hmm.
price sort of starts to become less relevant to you, right?
Totally.
So usually price gets really, really, really hard when it's hard to discern the value,
Hmm.
or you can't make a valid comparison, or you feel like you're getting taken advantage of, or any of
Hmm.
those kinds of
Yeah.
things, right? So I think it would be nice. It's nice when you can actually do that and be confident in how you display the value of your product. And
Right.
it's good for you as a seller, and it's good for the buyer because it allows them to actually make an easy decision, and be able to
Right.
explain it as they go up their chain. Right.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the important part.
Yeah, I mean, I agree because I think it will ultimately come down to sellers' abilities to be able to articulate the value around their proposal, as always. But now there's just different factors that are coming in that might not have been articulated before. So it'll be interesting to see how people start to change their language because as you probably know and think of internally for Gainwell, these AI like dynamic pricing models, they're awesome, but then there's also this whole concern around the black box nature of, well, how did you get to this number, and is the AI just trying to drive up the price as much as possible and maximize revenue? I think there have been a couple different examples out there with like the airlines and concert tickets and stuff where you're seeing these dynamic pricing models just go off the rails. And it'll be interesting to see how companies address it in more of like the corporate business setting, especially as it relates to pricing more project work than like a physical good like a ticket or an airline seat, like
Well,
a concert
and
ticket or
that's
airline seat.
and I totally agree with maximize. You know, that price is associated with the value, but you
Hmm.
still have to be reasonable, right?
Right.
And so I think at the end of the day, if you want to, let's take like congestion pricing just
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
as a model,
Hmm.
not a bad model, but if you take it to the extreme, it doesn't serve the purpose. You know
Right.
what I mean? It's, you get unintended consequences, right?
Hmm.
So I think at the end of the day, you want to have the ability to have variable pricing and situational pricing, but
Hmm.
just because I think I can get away with charging you X
Yeah.
doesn't mean I should.
Right.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just I may get away with it once,
Right.
right?
Right.
But that's not how, I mean, still deals are about relationships, and deals are about,
Hmm.
and so the perfect deal is not one where you win and they lose, right?
Exactly.
So you have to figure
100%.
out, I think using all of these tools to get to that point where you can look your customer in the eye, and both of you can realize that the deal you're cutting is good for both of you, right?
Hmm.
That's ultimately, I think, the objective of it.
Hmm.
And I think part of the way to get there is the evidence that comes from the information. It's like, well,
Hmm.
why is this good for me? Well, this is how it's been sold to all these other, it's like
Hmm.
you can draw comparisons that are based in fact, and
Totally.
I think that gives you more power in those selling conversations, right?
Hmm.
And it also, outside of the selling conversation, in the internal organization, when everyone's trying to be more profitable, it helps
Hmm.
you hone in on where your opportunity is to improve your cost structures,
Right.
and all of that stuff to make you more profitable. So I think you use it, you use your pricing tools to be facing outward, as well as to be
Right.
able to look better inward.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I mean, yeah, you're so spot on around like in business. Everything's relationship generated in terms of sales and selling. So you may be able to charge more one time because you have a person who's in very high demand and they're wanted on 6 or 8 different projects. And so you charge a bit more for that person one time. That's fine. But the opposite should be true as well. Like there should be the ability to give clients a break if you have people sitting around and you need to just get them working and they have a project. So it should go both ways. And I think
Yeah.
that would be the great equalizer in the long run. So I want to keep talking about this, but I want to talk about a different topic because
Mhm.
I know you've spent a lot of time in your career really elevating pricing to more of the executive level. And I think that there's a lot of folks that we talk to that are in pricing are trying to do that, are trying to get a seat at the executive table. And you sit in front of your CEO, CFO on a fairly weekly or biweekly basis talking about some of the deals you guys are working on. How have you been able to elevate it up to the executive team? And like, what advice would you give other pricers that are trying to really look at pricing as a strategic asset to the business versus just another department that exists?
I think at first you have to be focused on what they're focused on. If this is just a part of the business that's a means to an end, that's like a transaction within it, I think it gets taken for granted. And that's where, it's like any function. It's like, there are a lot of good people doing accounting, but if they're sitting in the
Hmm.
back and are not helping them make forward decisions, it's good, but it just doesn't resonate. It seems more back office,
Right.
in that mode. And so I think, you know, I think for us and for the organizations that I've run is we've really tried to focus in on the executive, on what's important to the executives, right? We don't even talk about a lot of the steps it takes to get pricing done, which are there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background, but that's not what we focus on. We focus on, we focus a lot on the market. We focus a lot on what the competition's doing. We focus on how we think the competition's doing it. We come to the business with a point of view. We also
Hmm.
come to the business with a point of view about ourselves. And then it's sort of like, this is what good looks like. So if this is what good looks like, this is where we need to improve. And I think those are all things that ultimately the objective is to, improve our win rate and improve our profitability at the same time, and
Hmm.
and grow. So those are the agenda points that get you in the conversation at the higher levels, and more the conversations I'm having are centered more around, Chuck, what do you think the market's doing, right?
Hmm.
And how do we solve for that? And those That's not like, oh, roll up a spreadsheet and put it into a client deliverable. That's
Right.
sort of secondary. So I just think you gotta, like, for us, we just focus on a different side of the value chain. Um,
Hmm.
and that's what sort of elevated us in the business.
That's cool. Any advice you'd personally give to other people, like in terms of even just having the approach in the conversation with the executive team? Because I think that's probably where some people struggle is they may recognize like that they need to try to bridge the gap between them and the team. But how would you even go about it if you were in an organization where you didn't have a seat at that table? How would you approach the executive team with this?
I think it's about, like I said, thinking about it from the how to win perspective, thinking
Hmm.
about it from the market perspective, and then let the process steps of the pricing stuff be sort of a secondary element. So, like,
Hmm.
even still, like, when I talk about doing more with less,
Hmm.
right? It's like, or how do you get faster, or how do you do more transactions, or I mean, there are a lot of times where I have access to information that affect parts of the business that come from doing deals and knowing what
Hmm.
stuff looks like. And so you
Definitely.
end up in conversations that, whether we talk about, win loss trends, whether we talk about our competition and how we've seen them, whether we talk about how our competitors, how our clients are selecting, And I mean, and I think those kinds of nuggets just, propel you to a different conversation
Hmm.
that is relevant to a wider community, right? And so it's all of those things that become helpful. And a lot of times say, oh, we didn't know we didn't know you had all this. We didn't know.
Hmm.
And it's like, wow. Like even some of the stuff that we do today, rolls into the forecasting process, right? It's like
Right.
if these things happen, here's what the revenues can look like in year X,
Yeah.
Y, and Z. And it has nothing to do with getting a bid out the door. It has to do with
Right.
having insight into all the information of how bids get out the door that
Hmm.
that other people just don't peer into on a regular basis. Right.
Yeah.
And so figuring out how to integrate that value into the other side of other parts of the business indirectly elevates what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've been able though to sort of tackle both ends where you have the technology and the data piece where you can actually spot the right trends. So when you're speaking back to the leaders, you're actually confident in terms of what you're saying and on your judgment. Whereas other folks who might be still riddled in Excel spreadsheets and disparate data, they can't go have that conversation because there's
Because they
not
don't
really a
know.
place of
Yeah,
fact.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't know. And I think moving out of what I'll call anecdotal conversations to more data
Hmm.
driven conversations, I think those are the ones that the executive teams tend to
Yeah.
appreciate more, right? You become more of a trusted advisor in,
Hmm.
in that when you're paying attention to those trends and that data, and you don't you're not just a transactional shop, right?
Right.
So I think,
Yeah.
that's at least that's how I've seen it. And I've seen that evolve. And, I've been in quite a few different companies, but I'd say the ones that where the pricing community has been the most elevated has been in the ones where the transactional pricing part of it is sort of a secondary component of it
Hmm.
versus the forward thinking market and how do we win and what is everybody else doing and how do we compare and all of that kind of stuff and how do we position all, that tends to be higher on the value chain, even though it's
Hmm.
all important. I just think
Right.
we tend to take we take a lot of the processes, for granted. But I think the analysis that comes out of it and being able to
Hmm.
learn something and learn quickly is what elevates, what sort of gets you to the next level.
Yeah. I mean, having that constant feedback loop and being able to continuously improve every time that you go at it. Because then again, you can refine your approach as you continue to do more and more bids and proposals and whatnot. And eventually, yeah, you'll have enough data to be able to make decisions based off of data and insights versus just a feeling of, well, I think this one we could land at this price because, well, they seem super interested and they love us. It's like,
Yeah.
well, no, based on the past five deals we've done like this is the range that we need to come in because this is where we've won
Right.
versus here's where we've lost. So yeah, and that when you're like you said, when you're speaking to an executive, that is what they want to hear. They don't want to
Well,
hear the,
yeah, they want to hear
well,
that, and it's
yeah,
like you want to make it. You sort of want to give them enough information so that they can. I mean, they can make a decision,
exactly.
right? and and
Hmm.
and and every and all of these decisions have a little bit of I'll say gamble to them, right?
Hmm.
It's like there's risk. And so I think as you feed a lot of this data to the executives, it allows them to take more calculated risk that's mapped to the situation, right? So I think that is what ends up representing, I'll say, the modern view of pricing
Hmm.
versus versus sort of the controls view of pricing, which was, what I saw when we started. And I think we're way more closely tied to the sales community
Hmm.
now than, I mean, than I'd say in the past. That's sort of the evolution I've
Yeah.
seen.
Yeah, no, I mean the best organizations from a pricing and selling perspective are the ones where those two teams are tied hand in hand. And then
Yeah.
there's also some sort of join up with delivery as well.
Yeah,
If you
there's
can
a
get the
join up
three
with
the three
delivery and
working,
then
yeah.
yeah.
If you get the three working together, it's a really beautiful thing. So Chuck, I know we're running out of time here. Any final thoughts or closing words that you want to add before we hop off?
No, I mean, I think I appreciate the time, and I think that really the future of this and I think the value of it is really in understanding the data that comes out and the outcomes as you go and you go after clients and you win and you lose. The
Hmm.
quicker you're able to understand the why, I think the better you'll be in the future, right? And being able to win more and be more successful in the market, right? So the ability to have the tooling that allows you to get to the data effectively is sort of what's going to differentiate, I'll say, the winners from the losers in the pricing game.
Definitely. Cool. Well, thank you, Chuck. We really appreciate having you on the podcast episode today, and we look forward to all of our continued work together.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks.